When did your child prove you wrong? My 7-year-old son Jake insisted our elderly neighbor Mrs. Peterson wasn't mean and just needed a friend, but I was convinced she was the neighborhood witch who hated all children until Jake's persistence revealed she was actually heartbroken and alone. Mrs. Peterson lived in the house next door and had a reputation for being the scariest person on our street. She'd yell at kids who walked on her lawn, never decorated for holidays, and always had her curtains drawn tight like she was hiding something. Jake was fascinated by her for some reason. Every day after school, he'd wave at her house and try to catch glimpses of her through the windows. I kept telling him to stay away because she clearly didn't want to be bothered. "She's not mean, Mom," Jake would say. "She just looks sad. I think she needs a friend." I'd explain that some people prefer to be left alone, and we should respect Mrs. Peterson's obvious desire for privacy. The situation escalated when Jake started leaving drawings on her porch. I'd find his crayon masterpieces missing and assume she was throwing them away, which confirmed my belief that she was just a grumpy old woman. I finally told Jake he needed to stop bothering Mrs. Peterson because it wasn't nice to force friendship on people who didn't want it. He looked at me with those serious 7-year-old eyes and said, "But Mom, everyone needs friends." Things came to a head when Jake got sick with strep throat and had to stay home from school. I was working from home when I heard him talking to someone outside. I looked out and saw him sitting on our porch steps, chatting with Mrs. Peterson over the fence. I rushed outside, ready to apologize for my son bothering her, but stopped when I heard their conversation. She was asking Jake about his favorite books and telling him about her garden. Her voice was gentle, nothing like the harsh tone she used with other kids. When Mrs. Peterson saw me, she looked embarrassed and started to leave, but Jake grabbed my hand and said, "Mom, Mrs. Peterson has been keeping all my drawings in a special box. She thinks I'm a really good artist." That's when Mrs. Peterson's composure cracked. She started crying and explained that Jake's drawings reminded her of her grandson who'd passed away 2 years ago. She'd been keeping to herself because the grief was too overwhelming. She told us that her grandson used to leave her drawings just like Jake did, and seeing those colorful pictures on her porch each day had been the only bright spot in her week. She wasn't throwing them away, she was treasuring them. Sal Peterson had been avoiding the neighborhood kids because they reminded her too much of what she'd lost, but Jake's persistent kindness had slowly been healing something broken inside her heart. I felt terrible for assuming the worst about her. Jake had seen something I'd completely missed, not meanness, but deep sadness that needed compassion instead of avoidance. From that day forward, Jake and Mrs. Peterson became best friends. She taught him about gardening, he brought her more artwork, and slowly she started engaging with other neighbors again. 6 months later, Mrs. Peterson's house was decorated for Halloween, and she was handing out full-size candy bars to trick-or-treaters. Kids who used to run past her house were now stopping to chat about her flower garden. Jake had been right all along. Mrs. Peterson wasn't mean, she was grieving and lonely. All she needed was one little boy who saw past her protective walls and refused to give up on friendship. Now Mrs. Peterson babysits Jake sometimes, and I often find them in her backyard, Jake asking a million questions while she patiently explains how plants grow. Sometimes children see the world more clearly than adults because they haven't learned to assume the worst about people yet.